Hello! In this video, I'm going to make a simple web component. As always, I start by going to the Mozilla Docs. I'm going to copy some starter code. This is just a class that will be the basis of the custom element. My custom element will present a quiz question, so I'm calling it quiz question. After the class is defined, you have to actually register your new custom element. You specify the class that will give the behavior of the element, and then you give the name of the tag, which in this case is going to be quiz-q. You have to have a dash in a custom element name, and the custom element name also has to start with a lowercase. Now we've got a basic custom element, but it doesn't do anything yet. To start giving it some behavior and appearance, I'm going to create a shadow root. For prototyping, I'm going to create the shadow root using the template element and specifying the shadow root mode attribute. But now that it has a shadow root, that's all that appears in the custom element. In order to let the content of the custom element actually appear here, we're going to create a default slot. I'm also going to start adding some styling, and you'll notice that I gave my span here an ID. I can do this because the shadow DOM is encapsulated. If you go into the inspector, you can see the shadow DOM, you can see the slots, you can see how everything is put together. Next, I'm going to add a button to start exploring the interactivity of this custom element. To begin, I'm just going to have the button log the value of this to the console so we can see what that looks like. Just out of curiosity, I want to go in here and look. If we look at the button, this is what this is the button. And if we go in and look at its parent element, and then we look at that element's parent node, that is the shadow root of this custom element. And by getting the host property of that, we could get a reference to the custom element itself if we wanted to. So to test this out, I just stored a reference to the button in a temporary variable. Now I'm accessing and set the attribute on that custom element, because ultimately what I'm going to do is store the answer to the quiz question as an attribute of the custom element. But instead of using the template element to create the shadow DOM, I'm going to go ahead and change things around to create the shadow DOM programmatically. But super easy, I'm just copying over the shadow DOM that I had created as a prototype, use the JavaScript attach shadow mode open, and then set the inner HTML of the shadow root to this HTML. Once that has all been placed in there, I can start doing things like here I am getting a reference to the button element inside the shadow root. And notice that the query selector is not on document, it's on this .shadow root. And again, that's because the shadow DOM is encapsulated from the normal DOM. Next, I'm going to remove the template because that's not being used anymore. It's done programmatically. And now I'm adding the answer attribute to my custom element. And the next thing I'm going to do is just add some HTML to the shadow DOM here that when I push the button is going to display the answer. So after I've set up my HTML, I'm going to create another JavaScript variable to hold a reference to the span element here. And when the button is clicked, instead of logging something to the console, it's going to set the inner HTML of the span to a little message that says what the answer is using a template string here. Very nice. But what I really want is a way for the user to enter what they think the answer is. So I'm going to create some more HTML and put in an input field here, give it an ID showing that it is the response from the user. There it is, very nice. And now I'm going to add some more JavaScript, get a reference to that input. Now I'm going to attach an event listener to the input so that every time the user types something, it will check the validity. And here I'm going to add a state to my custom element, which you can do by using this method called attachInternals. So I'm going to attach internals to my custom element, and I'm going to store a reference to that object that gets returned as this._internals. This is going to allow me to control the state, or what states the custom element is in. And I can select for those states using CSS. In the case of the button click, I used an arrow function. And in that case, the value of this comes from the context. So the value of this in this constructor method here is the custom element. So inside my arrow function, that's what this is as well. By using a regular function here for the input event listener, the value of this is going to be the button, or rather here the input that the event is being triggered on. And I've also stored a reference to the custom element as a variable called self. So now inside this event listener, I can easily reference this, which is the input, or self, which is the custom element. If the input is empty, then there will be no special state. But if the input has anything in it, it will be in either state wrong or right. And depending on if it's in one of those states, I'm going to change the color of the border. Now this is interesting. My custom element has a border here, but it's not rendering the way we would expect it to. And that's because the root of the shadow DOM has its display property set to inline. What we need to do is change the display property of the root of the shadow DOM, and you can do that by using the host specifier. So I'm going to say select for the root, or for the host, and change its display to block, which looks much better now. If it's in the wrong state, the border will be red, and if it's in the right state, the border will be blue. Lovely. At this point, I feel like this custom element is almost done. But instead of displaying it simply as a block, I've decided that I want to allow these to appear in lists. So I changed the display property to list item. Now, when they're not in a list, that doesn't do anything. But if I create an ordered list and place them inside of it, well then let's see what happens. Ah, very nice. This is almost what I wanted, except I would really like those numbers to be inside of the border instead of outside. the list style position property can fix that for me. Now, I don't really want the question to be on the next line. And I know that really the problem here is that there's a div holding the question, and the div is being displayed as a block, which is moving it down to the next line. So to experiment, I specify display inline block on that div, and that does what I want. However, after thinking about it for another few seconds, I realized I could just take that div out entirely. And now the question displays right after the number, and that's it. This is my simple custom element. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions or comments, thoughts, please leave them in the comments, and I look forward to doing another video for you again soon.